Hey guys, thanks for watching the show. The best way to support the podcast are the links in the description. The locals in the Patreon, I do daily videos, behind the scenes, like 5 minute videos, or Ko-fi, which is buy me a coffee, Cash App, and PayPal. Those five are the best way to support the show. A dollar donation a month legitimately makes a difference. The show needs about $5,000 a month to run on. The majority of that is from YouTube, Rumble, and Spotify, which is bad because if any one of those goes south, which they have in the past, the podcast is left hanging. Right now, the show gets about $1,500 a month from fans. I want to get that up to 5,000 so that the rest of them can just go pound sand. So, if you can, please go to one of those links in the description. Genuinely, a dollar a month makes a difference. Or you can get Sport Drink, the sports drink company that sponsors me. Use promo code Tommy's Podcast. Or you can get Heaven's Harvest Prepper Food, promo code TPC. Both those links are in the description. And if you can't or don't want to do any of that, I would ask that you go to ARC, the Association for the Recovery of Children, ARC. It's in the description. It's a bunch of special forces guys that don't take salaries, and once a month, that's about how long it takes, they rescue a sex trafficked child, and they've been doing that monthly since 1993. So 33 years, and they've been doing it 12 times a year. They genuinely save lives. If you are in a tough spot with money, I would ask that you donate to them first, and if you can, donate to me second. Thank you guys. And we are recording on Sunday, March 15th, 2026 at 9:09 a.m. Eastern Time with not the owner of the Cleveland Brown, Jim Haslam. And yeah, no, the only other Carrigan actually last week I found a Tommy Carrigan, and it was like a shitty actor in like the silent film era. And I look at that and I'm like, that's best case scenario. It's not even a full Wikipedia page. It's one of those pages that just has like three sentences. That's best case. All the effort I put into the show, best case in a century, someone will find a black and white photo of me and they'll be like, podcaster. And but yeah, man, no, you were just well, actually, real quick, introduce yourself to everybody.
So my name's Jim Haslam. We were just talking off air. If you Google me, you'll find a rich guy who owns the Cleveland Browns, who no relation to Haslam. Also a funny name. It's British. It's relatively small. Numbers, but pretty prominent. I guess in the Haslam community. So, who am I? I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm not a virologist. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a scientist. What am I known as online? A lab leaker. Someone that spent an inordinate amount of time debating the origins of SARS-CoV-2. So I was introduced to the Lab Leak debate in late December 2020. This is, I'm thinking the pandemic's going to end. We're all going to move on with our lives. Things kind of burning out, hopefully, but no, it's coming back. And here comes the vaccine. And here comes the mandates and the mass mandates. And this all driving me nutty. I'm just doing a road trip listening to Joe Rogan. And on there is a guy named Alex Berenson, who we both know. And I just appeared on his Substack interview this weekend, I guess on Friday. And he mentioned something during the podcast. I tuned in for the mRNA info, which is what Alex Berenson is known for. And he mentioned something called a furin cleavage site inside the genome when he was talking about potential lab leak. And that intrigued me. I'm like, what the hell is that? A furin cleavage site? It's basically just, think of a woman's breast, right in the middle of this genome called SARS-CoV-2 is this thing called a furin cleavage site. It's this beautiful genomic anomaly. And I went home to Google it. When I got home, I don't find anything on it because I'm still in my mainstream days trying to,
Well, it's not on the news, though. Well, CNN said that it didn't.
Talk about the furin
I looked at both CNN and
exist.
Fox, and they both said this isn't a lab leak. We all went through that dark night of the soul. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, I just looking back upon myself, just, what's that, 6 years ago now, 5 years ago? It's just, I was in a mainstream state because you don't have time to look into this. You don't really want to bother with this. You just want to live your life and be left alone. And I kind of filed it away. And then in early 2021, a pretty prominent writer named Nicholson Baker wrote a piece on Lab Leak in New York Magazine. Oh, well, here's some mainstream news I can read now on Lab Leak. And I got excited and I read it. And in the process of reading it, I learned more about this thing called the furin cleavage site, this genomic anomaly, again, in the middle of the SARS-CoV-2 genome. And what was perplexing to me is that he mentioned two white guys in this, I don't know, 10-page long magazine feature. And one of them was named Peter Daszak, who I think a lot of us know. He's the EcoHealth guy that's been in the news quite a bit if you're interested in the Lab Leak debate. And the other one really intrigued me because he was the technical brains on this kind of research. And his name's Ralph Barrick. He is a distinguished professor at the University of North Carolina on the campus of Chapel Hill, 15-minute walk from where Michael Jordan played basketball during his era. is a biodefense lab on the campus of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And in that biodefense lab, a BSL-3, which isn't the biggest, but it's up there. It's the second biggest. You got like a hood, you got all the gloves and all that. It's even got a pressurized little face mask that you breathe into. And in there is Ralph Barrick, who's made a life, a career, a name for himself, modifying coronaviruses. And if you've studied the lab leak debate, you would inevitably come across this guy's name. He's a 70-year-old white man now. I guess during this pandemic, he was, near 65 or something. These are professors for life. They have jobs for life. These are the people the U.S. government turns to during a pandemic, like a coronavirus pandemic with engineering potential. And early in the pandemic, like March of 2020, the U.S. government emailed Ralph Barrick, "Is this thing engineered?" And he said, "No, absolutely no evidence of engineering." So the U.S. government has gone on record. It's called the Red Dawn emails. You can read them in the New York Times. This is incredible. It's an incredible email. And it's a bunch of biodefense officials, kind of like, it's not Robert Malone, but kind of like him and that kind of element they run around in, the type of people that know what to look for. And the question was very specific. I don't want to get too far to the weeds, but the question was great. Ralph Barrick, are there any restriction sites in this genome that suggest it's engineered? And Ralph Barrick's reply was no evidence of genetic engineering. He did not mention the furin cleavage site, which was mentioned by Alex Berenson on a Joe Rogan podcast. So Ralph Barrick himself, a coronavirus expert, who would have recognized this furin cleavage site, which does not belong in this virus. There's never been a furin cleavage site found in a SARS-like virus. Never, ever. And USAID Predict and DTRA and DARPA have basically collected every bat sample on the planet. And they have shipped them back to the US for analysis for people like Ralph Barrick to do what they call countermeasures with. So Ralph Barrick did not even mention the furin cleavage site to the US government biodefense officials. Now, I saw that email before something called DARPA Diffuse leaked. This is a document written by Ralph Barrick in 2018. It's written in English. It's written by a distinguished university professor. And in this 2018 document, Ralph Barrick, a white man in a white lab coat on the campus of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, says, "I will insert a furin cleavage site into a novel SARS-like virus, and I, Ralph Barrick, will lead the vaccine trials in Wuhan." And he used the word "I will provide" in this document. Ralph Barrick said, "I will provide the genome to the Wuhan Institute of Virology for testing this modified genome with this furin cleavage site on Chinese horseshoe bats." Now, I don't want to freak out everyone because I already talked about two crazy things, bats and genomic engineering. But this is what the guy does. He's done it for his whole life. He modifies genomes, and now he's got this modified genome, and he's trying to do something called a vaccine, a live attenuated vaccine, which is basically a weakened virus. He has taken the virus from Wuhan or from USAID Predict or from the bat caves and God knows where. He has done genetic modifications to it, weakened it, modified it, stuck the furin cleavage site into it, and now he wants to send it back to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, who he's been collaborating with for almost a decade. From about 2012 till 2019, he is working with them. They are sharing bat samples with him. The bat lady, she's called Shizing Li from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. If you're into lab leak, you know who that is. Her face is all over the newspapers. She would provide Ralph Barrick these relatively harmless genomes via the USAID Predict project, via DTRA projects, via DARPA projects, and most importantly, via NIH, Tony Fauci, NIAID projects. They would pay the bat lady. She would go out there to the bat caves. She would collect the bat sample. She would stick a Q-tip up the bat's butt. She'd take it back to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. She would then send it to her PCR machine, they call it. She'd get the genomic sequence, and she would sometimes upload that to the database, in the NIH database. And in 2018, she uploaded a sample called RATG13, which is, if you're into the lab leak debate, you understand that is the closest relative known during the pandemic, during the outbreak of the pandemic. She uploaded it to the NIH database in 2018. Someone like Ralph Barrick could download it, and then he could do what's called genomic modifications to it, like insert this infamous furin cleavage site. And then he could provide it, was his words, in this 2018 document. I will provide it back to the Wuhan Institute of Virology for testing on their Chinese horseshoe bats. So what Ralph Barrick was doing, and I'm going to say this point blank on camera, he is the creator of the SARS-CoV-2 genome. He knows who I am. UNC administrators know who I am. I have asked Ralph Barrick point blank recently for an alibi. He forwarded it to the UNC communications department, and they responded back to me and they said, your only statement from us is his testimony. And inside his testimony, I can basically convict the guy. I'm not going to talk like this, in a mean kind of way. This was an accident, but this was an animal vaccine. So I want to not make it too crazy. This was a mistake. So I can talk like this on camera because it's not defamation. I'm not defaming anyone. It's just an accident. It's an animal vaccine, essentially. So in 2018, Ralph Baric in the DARPA diffuse document said, I will provide it back to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And that is what leaked. And that is what got out. And that is what caused this pandemic. There's a lot more to it than that, but it's a good place to start. And as crazy as that sounds, one of your guests, Dave Cullum, was on Tucker Carlson, and he said more or less the same thing. This thing came out of UNC. Now, Tucker Carlson's question back to Dave, it's not easy to answer, why was it in Wuhan and how did it get there? So Ralph Baric's technology is so advanced, it fits in a 1 millimeter tube and it sits on dry ice and it ships around the world within 48 hours. Underneath your feet on every flight you've taken is some sort of biodefense package. It's basically a box in a box in a box. And the CDC has shipping, regulations they all follow. It's called an MTA, Material Transfer Agreement. When you go into Ralph Baric's emails, it's one FedEx shipping number after another. There's a dedicated shipping and receiving department on the campus of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It is so advanced and so crazy how much they share samples. People like Xi Jinping share samples with Ralph Baric. So from Wuhan to China, and people like Ralph Baric can share samples with Xi Jinping. So before this document, though, called DARPA Diffuse leaked, we did not have a recorded documentation of Ralph Baric wanting to send back samples. It was always like a one-way trip from Wuhan to Chapel Hill. But this document was basically Ralph Baric in 2018 pre-confessing to the crime of creating COVID-19. And who was it found by? A U.S. Marine. This is my favorite part of the story. He was on loan to DARPA during the pandemic, and he was trying to figure this thing out like the rest of us. What is it? Where'd it come from? And he basically had a top secret clearance, apparently. He reached into a classified folder where he found this document, which was basically written in 2018 again by Ralph Baric to DARPA, to the sub-agency within Pentagon is DARPA. And at that time, DARPA was really wanting to vaccinate bats. And that just sounds crazy to people. But, all these viruses, I think you've talked about Nipah. It came from bats.
Mm-hmm.
SARS-1, do you remember SARS-1? Are you old enough for that?
Vaguely, that was early 2000s.
That was during the Iraq War in 2003.
Yeah,
so it got wiped from the news, but it came from Asia. But guess what? It shut down all those military bases on the Pacific Rim. They all got quarantined in 2003. SARS-1 was pretty nasty. I mean, unlike SARS-2, it could kill you. But because it could kill you, it didn't spread very far. So Nipah is very nasty. It will kill you. But that comes from bats. SARS comes from bats. You heard about MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome? That's in the Middle East. Guess what's in the Middle East? Bunch of U.S. military bases. Guess where that comes from? Bats via camels. You've heard about Ebola, obviously. We all have. Guess where that comes from? Bats. All these things come from bats. I've read Tony Fauci's memoirs recently. Half of this book is dedicated to Ebola. The guy was utterly obsessed with the same process that everyone else was doing in 2017 and 2018. The whole biodefense community in the U.S., more or less, all these U.S. virologists are really obsessed with bats. Bats are not birds. They're mammals like you and me. So if someone like Ralph Baric were to create something, to vaccinate something like a bat, as crazy as that sounds, it could spill over into humans accidentally during a trial inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And on top, I don't get way far out of the weeds. Stop me any time. But the time that Major Joseph Murphy is his name, you can Google him, leaked this DARPA diffuse document. There was one name in there, Ralph Baric. I will insert the furin cleavage site, and I will provide this novel chimera, he calls it, a combination of many viruses into one, to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But he would provide it to someone called Linfa Wang. Linfa Wang is essentially Ralph Baric of Singapore. And that was another name on the DARPA document. And Linfa Wang, after it leaked, basically named Ralph Baric the author of the furin cleavage site document, or the paragraph inside the document. But Linfa Wang's name was also attached to someone named Danielle Anderson. And those three names are right next to each other inside this document. Guess who was in the Wuhan BSL-4 in late 2019? Danielle Anderson. She is our patient zero. Bless her heart, not her fault. This was an accident. It got out on her watch, though. Stuff happens. She's in a Chinese biolab. She's been invited there by the Chinese scientist, ironically. This is not, a lot of people go off of these tangents, PLA, Chinese bioweapon. No. No, there is no PLA in Wuhan before 2020. The PLA took over the lab. The Chinese military took over the lab after a lab leak in like early 2020. But before 2020, there is zero PLA inside that area. I'm a lab leaker. We have debated this online, from till we all die probably. But no one has found any PLA. No one has found any nefarious. No one has found. I myself was basically looking for some PLA guy in August of 2019. And then this guy named Major Murphy released a DARPA diffuse document 1 month later in September of 2021. I'm sorry, not August 2019, August of 2021. And then 1 month later in September of 2021, Murphy leaked diffuse, and I saw 3 names: Ralph Barrick, furin cleavage site, Linfa Wong, and then Daniel Anderson. So I went to Linfa Wong and I said, "Did you step down on January 10th of 2020? Did you resign as the director of the Emerging Infectious Disease Division?" Duke University is also in Singapore, which also has people like Daniel Anderson, who works for Duke, inside the Wuhan PSL4. He said, "Yes, I did." January 10th of 2020 is the born-on date for SARS-CoV-2. It was the day the SARS-CoV-2 genome was uploaded. Now, I'm not going to say, you can put, 2 and 2 together. He recognized the sequence. He did the honorable thing. They stepped on his sword kind of thing. He stepped down as the director of the Emerging Infectious Disease Division. He's still a professor there at Duke, professor for life. But he basically recognized what got out on his underling's watch, Daniel Anderson. So you can Google her. Let's not contact her or bother her or anything. But she's more or less patient zero, not her fault again. And this thing got out, on her watch. And this document, by the way, DARPA diffuse, it was basically covered by the New York Times. So you can Google it. You can mainstream news. Even the New York Times covered it. But the New York Times said it wasn't funded, which is correct. But as you and I both know, everything in D.C. gets funded. Washington, D.C. is just swimming in money. They fund everything. It was a $14 million bid to vaccinate Chinese bats, written by Peter Daszak and Ralph Barrick. And what they did is they broke it up and resubmitted it to Tony Fauci. And Tony Fauci funded the DARPA diffuse document. So I'm here to tell you, Tony Fauci knows who I am, by the way. I've kind of gotten into his Gmail, and I've asked him politely and professionally, prove me wrong, Dr. Fauci, or I'm going to keep talking about you openly and publicly like we're doing right now. And he won't. He can't. And so I'll end my rant with this. I'll have you like, who the heck are you? Basically, Jeffrey Sachs, I think we all know who he is, plucked me out of obscurity from my blog I was writing, Reverse Engineering the SARS-CoV-2, on Substack starting in 2022. He came along for the ride with me, and he plucked me out and he put me in front of the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization, we know what that is, the WHO, has this group called SAGO, which was 27 scientists dedicated to the purpose of finding the origins of SARS-CoV-2. And he put me in front of them last year, and we started a debate. And we went at it. It was me versus 27 scientists. I'm not smart, but I'm right. And I'll let you and your readers and listeners go judge for yourself. But I'm going to declare victory on this debate because it's biologically impossible for anyone in that Wuhan Institute of Virology or any animal in that Wuhan market to have created SARS-CoV-2. And to me, this is good news. We can now prove the Wuhan lab leak, but even better, it leads back to Tony Fauci. That's the only thing I want to really talk about. I want to talk about Ralph Barrick because his technology technically didn't cause, the contagious pandemic. There's someone else involved in that. I'm not sure if I want to go in that route here yet, but that's essentially, who I am, a proud nobody, mechanical engineer that basically sells discometers, rayometers in the oil and gas industry. And I was always thinking about viscosity. And when you're thinking about viscosity, Newtonian, non-Newtonian fluids, thixotropic materials, you always think about air too, as another study of fluid dynamics. One of my books from college is over my shoulder on fluid dynamics. And when you think about air, you can think about contagion. And it was a group of, mechanical engineers, HVAC engineers, physicists, aerosol specialists that lobbied the World Health Organization to admit COVID was airborne. If you remember early on in the pandemic, they would not admit it was even airborne. They thought it was on surfaces. They claimed just wash your hands. No, I mean, with the functioning brain, this thing was airborne. It was contagious. So it was a group of mechanical engineers, along with some others, that lobbied the World Health Organization to admit it was airborne. And along come another one, myself, to basically debate them to admit this thing is a lab leak. And I'll try to end it here before I keep going off. But we can actually see who created this thing, along with Ralph Barrick, if we look at the transmission models of SARS-CoV-2. So there's if you're trying to make a vaccine like Ralph Barrick was, a genomic vaccine, you can't just inject the bat and basically expect to inoculate it. Even if you could, it's not feasible because there's so many bats out there in the caves and they're so hard to reach. Is it really even feasible to go out there and inoculate each one of them one by one if you're creating an animal vaccine like SARS-CoV-2? No. So you have to kind of make it contagious. And so this is where it really gets crazy. So you basically have this idea that you take the needle out and instead of, injecting one animal, you still inject it, but then the animal now spreads it to the next and spreads it to the next and spreads it to the next. Dr. Razik, who's read my book twice, he'll be my independent fact checker. You can find him on YouTube. Calls it infectious through air. This is how the technology has advanced so much. These virologists in this U.S. lab of Tony Fauci's now, I'm bringing him into the fold, was basically aerosolizing agents. That really sounds nasty, and it really is in the grand scheme of things. But this was a benevolent, purpose. The idea was that you could vaccinate all the animals in the animal kingdom. And when you do that, you only have to stick the needle into one animal. It flies off, it goes back to his bat cave, and then it breathes or sneezes or has sex with the next animal. And then it breathes or sneezes and has sex with the next animal. And it just spreads and spreads and spreads. It's called a self-spreading vaccine, a transmissible vaccine. I like the word contagious vaccine. And that's what COVID-19 is. It is a contagious animal vaccine. And this thing was aerosolized. This thing called Ralph Barrick's genome was sent to Tony Fauci's biodefense lab in Montana. Tony Fauci has a biodefense lab in Montana. It's called Rocky Mountain Lab. Think Fort Detrick, but not near DC, out there in Hamilton, Montana, the middle of nowhere. It's so small, Alex Berenson chose it as the hometown of his hero, Jack, in his spy novels. I go, why'd you choose Hamilton? Well, it's just got one stoplight. Well, yeah, that's correct. But in this little one stoplight town in Hamilton, Montana, is this giant BSL-4 facility. It is huge. It dates back 100 years. It is an NIAID facility. And Fauci himself called it his satellite campus. This is Fauci's baby. And inside this giant BSL-4 is one Vincent Munster. He is the colleague of Ralph Barrick. He is the DARPA colleague of Ralph Barrick. He was winning DARPA projects while Ralph Barrick was losing them because his technology is cheaper. Ralph Barrick's is expensive. Ralph Barrick had to go out there and almost vaccinate each individual bat with his technology, whereas Vincent Munster could make Ralph Barrick's technology contagious, spreadable. And what Vincent Munster did, I've talked to these, I haven't talked to them, they don't respond back to me, but I've asked them to prove me wrong and they won't. So let's not defend men that will not defend themselves. Ralph Barrick's not defending himself, nor is Tony Fauci, nor is Vincent Munster. So Vincent Munster took Ralph Barrick's genome and he aerosolized it. He made it an airborne agent. And he did that using 5 animals: the American deer, the American deer mouse, the American mink, the American lab bat, and the Syrian golden hamster. So when SARS-2 gets out, COVID-19 leaks from this Wuhan lab. Again, if a genome or if a virus is engineered, wherever it's spilled over in the human population, that's also where it's engineered. They're shipping needles and samples all around the world. So when SARS-2 gets out, myself thinking out this thing about from an aerosolized perspective, that's the only thing I really cared about, air at the time. What animals transmit SARS-CoV-2? So you can infect a dog with SARS-2, it doesn't infect another dog. You can infect a cat, it doesn't infect another cat. You can infect a humanized mouse, it doesn't infect another humanized mouse. You can infect a raccoon dog, it doesn't infect another raccoon dog. Well, guess what SARS-2 transmits inefficiently? There's only 5 animals on the planet. 5 animals, and those are the American deer, the American deer mouse, the American mink, the American bat, and the Syrian golden hamster. And 4 of those 5 are tied in 2018-19 research to self-spreading vaccines. This was Fauci's post 9/11 biodefense project. He has been working on this and encouraging this kind of risky research for several years, going back to at least 2014-15. His biodefense lab in Montana, Rocky Mountain Lab, was working on self-spreading vaccines. And this is why Tony Fauci was up until 3 a.m. after being told it looks engineered. If you follow the lab leak debate, you basically see this guy, a virologist over there on the West Coast, email Tony Fauci in January 2020, before most of us even know of a town named Wuhan, and he's told it's engineered because the furin cleavage site in the middle of it makes it stick out like a sore thumb, essentially. But he's told it's engineered. He's up until 3 a.m. covering his tracks. And everyone thought at the time, he's just covering for China. He was funding gain of function research over there. Some Chinaman messed up. No. This is the most selfish man on the planet. He ain't covering for China. He's covering his own ass. He knew it was engineered because his own lab helped engineer it. I've written a book on this. I basically have named Fauci, Vincent Munster, and Ralph Barrick as the creators. I've debated it with the World Health Organization, and I'm not going to hear promote that. I'm just here to look at the back. It's not going to show up well, but if you just flip the cover of the back, you can see the furin cleavage site really easily if you do what's called the alignment. And that's a piece of evidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology gave up early in the pandemic, and it allowed virologists, innocent virologists, third-party virologists, to see the gap in the middle of this thing. And that furin cleavage site is what made it look engineered. So the whole thing has just been one big giant kerfuffle. It's just, and it is as crazy as all this sounds, and don't get me wrong, it is crazy. I've asked, hundreds of scientists, virologists, bat immunologists to prove me wrong. So everyone inside the debate knows who I am. No one outside the debate knows who I am. And the only reason I talk about freely is because it's an accident. That's all it was an accident. But this thing was created with intent, Tommy. There is no doubt this thing was created to spread. It was designed to spread, and it did just what it was designed to do. I mean, this thing, we've all been infected multiple times over probably by now, but the infection was an inoculation. My thought process was, what has an 100% infection rate but a 99.9% survival rate? A vaccine. And when this big brain who did most of the work I just finished what he started, his name was Major Joseph Murphy, reached into the classified folder in 2021, leaked the DARPA diffuse document. Ralph Barrick went quiet. Vincent Munster went quiet. Tony Fauci got scared. And my first thought was, how did Tony Fauci fund this thing? And it took me forever to find out how. But they basically broke up the bid, repackaged it, and it went into Fauci's NIAID as the funder of the DARPA diffuse document. So I'll try to end that long, rant there. I mean, I don't want to overwhelm you and your listeners here, but it would be fun, to have some pushback from scientists. I would love it. And when I finally got some pushback from the scientists, they backed off. I went to the World Health Organization. I go, is that all y'all got? Because I was getting excited because y'all were actually pushing back upon me. You know what she told me? Go antagonize those that you're accusing of doing this. I'm like, well, kind of already done that, but I guess I'll continue to do that here on camera. So, I'll even send our interview to Tony Fauci. I mean, I have his Gmail now. I'm not trying to antagonize the guy. I'm professionally asking him, prove me wrong. Okay. I mean, that's essentially what I have. I have peer-reviewed evidence that this thing was basically aerosolized, turned into an airborne agent in your lab with those 5 animals that transmit SARS-CoV-2. None of the 5 are found in Wuhan. None of the 5 are found in China. All 5 are only found in one place, Tony Fauci's Biodefense Center in Montana. There was an animal rights group that went into the Rocky Mountain lab, Tony Fauci's lab, satellite campus again, and issued a FOIA on his animal inventory in 2017, and they published it in 2018. And those 5 animals are found in there. Once COVID from Wuhan spilled into deer in America, I was like, what the fuck is that? What's going on there? That was the weirdest thing, wasn't it? Yeah. Guess what American scientists use American deer for? Self-spreading vaccine research. Tuberculosis comes from deer. And their idea was that they were going to come up with a TB vaccine for deer. If you inject the deer with this TB vaccine, it runs off into the wild. Bambi runs off into the wild, sneezes on the next Bambi, which sneezes on the next Bambi. And essentially you can vaccinate all the Bambis against tuberculosis. And once I noticed that, that's when I got my brain around this. What the fuck is COVID from Wuhan doing in American deer? And that was the clue that clued me in. And the next one was the American deer mouse, no relation, also used for self-spreading vaccines. The next one was the American mink. Remember those mink farms over there in the Netherlands and Denmark that caught COVID? That was a clue. There's no American mink in China, but there are American mink in Fauci's Biodefense Center in Montana. They're a perfect little, model for getting agents airborne. And then the other one's called the American bat, called the Egyptian fruit bat, the SARS-2 reservoir host. And the final one was the Syrian golden hamster. If you're into the bioweapon theory, that was Li Meng Yang, and she actually published a paper on Syrian golden hamsters being a transmission model. So she was, what I've done is taken everyone's hard work, repackaged it, because we were looking for evidence in the wrong hemisphere. Everyone's looking for evidence in China, Wuhan, and whatnot. And the second Major Murphy leaked DARPA diffuse, and he called it the American-made bat vaccine. That, as crazy as that sounds, that's what this thing is. And the second he did that, I was like, oh my God, this may be the craziest, greatest story of our life. This thing was cooked up in U.S. labs by Ralph Barrick, who is an American, by Vincent Munster, who's Dutch, working in Rocky Mountain Lab. He may have his green card by now, I'm not quite sure. By Linfa Wang, a Chinese man working for Duke in Singapore, by Danielle Anderson, an Australian woman who was in Wuhan. So it's an international team and all funded by Fauci, essentially. So that's the story in a nutshell. I know it's a lot to digest. There's a blog, Reverse Engineering the SARS-CoV-2, Reverse Engineering the Origins of SARS-CoV-2. There's a book, COVID-19 Mystery Solved. And there's conversations like this where I become a little more confident in what happened so I can go on camera and talk about it without suffering any consequences, because it's, don't get me wrong, it was created with intent and they were playing with fire but they almost got away with it. Unless Murphy went into this document, found this top secret document, or essentially a classified folder, and this document inside there, and leaked it. So I wish, people like Robert Malone would take to this. You've had him on a few times. It would be good to have him on. If I could just have his attention for an hour. It does not implicate Malone or anyone like that because he's DTRA. This does kind of implicate DARPA, I'll be honest with you. There's really no way around that. But most importantly, it definitely implicates Fauci. He was the driving force behind this idea. Tony Fauci, post 9/11, was just all about, biodefense, obviously. He was all about these nasty pathogens and what to do with them. Every time Ebola would happen or an Ebola outbreak, the senator would call up Fauci, do something. Here's another, $1 billion. The MERS outbreak, Fauci, do something. Here's another $1 billion. The SARS outbreak from way back then, they were still talking about in 2018. So the idea was to vaccinate the animal that creates these nasty pathogens, bats, which again, aren't birds, they're mammals like you and me. So you're playing with fire. They essentially were playing with fire. And this infamous furin cleavage site we started off talking about was inserted with purpose and with intent. It wasn't to infect humans, it was to infect bats. Bats also contain, their mammalian bat cells also contain furin. So you can see the documentation of Ralph Barrick and Vincent Munster together infecting Egyptian fruit bats in Tony Fauci's lab in 2018. And Jeffrey Sachs has gone on Tucker Carlson and talked about this evidence. So this story is slowly getting out by myself, Jeffrey Sachs, Dr. Razik, and others. The problem is I'm getting in a bit of a head fight with fellow lab leakers about who did it. And the evidence is mounting that, some U.S. labs did this thing in 2019, again, as an accident. And again, as an unintended consequence to somewhat good intentions. But these people are, they want to vaccinate every living organism on the planet. And they wound up doing that.
I was gonna say so I got banned from YouTube. I'm back on, but I got banned in 2021 I started interviewing doctors in like late 2020. 2021, early 2021 is when I first started interviewing Dr. Malone, Dr. McCullough, Dr. Hatfield, Dr. Ken Alabek, who headed up the Soviet Union's bioweapon program. And I was going down all these fucking rabbit holes. And the entire time, there was no vested interest. I just figured we would get to the bottom of it. And I mean, so I've done 2,000 episodes. I'm not kidding when I say I hit 1,000 episodes by December 2022. I'd say of the first 1,000, 700 were with doctors about COVID.
Really?
Oh yeah, it was. Oh, like Dr. McCall and Dr. Malone both came on my show. So many times I got banned from YouTube before they even went on Rogan. Like, so I had all these guys, and I can't even name them all just through Dr. McCall's Rolodex, Dr. Malone's Rolodex. But so my brain had already been melted by all this stuff. And for me, the funniest one was having on, I don't know if you know of Dr. Alabek, Dr. Ken Alabek. He wrote Biohazard, I think. He was the head of the Soviet Union biopreparat, and he was smuggling.
Alabek.
Ken Alabek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I've had him on like 10, 20 times. Yeah.
Marburg. Marburg comes from bats.
Yeah.
That's where Marburg comes from.
Yeah. Bats. And no, I've interviewed him probably 20 times. And like,
you have. Get him on, Tommy. We need to do a little round table. I want to have a discussion about this openly because there's so much evidence. Virologists, they all know who I am by now because I've asked them all politely, pleasantly, and professionally to prove me wrong, and they can't. They won't. They are denying Darwin. To deny the evidence I presented to the World Health Organization is to deny Darwin himself. That's the way Sago and I ended it. So if we can get all these guys online, and I can just get their attention for an hour and present the evidence a little, in a more scientific manner, hopefully they'll digest it. And if they deny it, they're denying Darwin. That's essentially what's happening right now. Since it was engineered in Fauci's lab, we can prove the Wuhan lab leak. Since the animals that transmit it were all peer-reviewed publications. So I have peer-reviewed publications in Nature and Science and all these PNAS and all these other, pontifications. Essentially, we can use the science against them to prove the lab leak. And yeah, we all go into these little, conspiratorial things, myself included. Don't get me wrong, Alabek and all that. But I don't want to nuke your channel by any means either. But we can talk about this openly on YouTube. And I haven't seen any consequences. I got my own YouTube channel, not nearly as prevalent as yours, obviously. But Dr. McCullough was the first one to give me a chance when I wrote the book a year ago to interview me. No one else would touch me. I'm having a hard time getting the story out. Berenson was the biggest one, the biggest name to interview me so far. Obviously, Jeffrey Sachs is a big name, and Dr. Razik, but it takes a while to get your brain around the massive amount of evidence we have. And to me, this becomes one of the greatest, craziest stories of all time. If pin this thing on Fauci, I mean, Out of all the Alabak, Russian bioweapons, PLA generals, those are all good little stories, I guess, but to be able to pin this thing, the death count, the chaos, and the cover up on Fauci himself, who will not defend himself, by the way. I politely asked him, Dr. Fauci, Sago's antagonized me. I think I've won the debate. Are you ready to deny Darwin? Otherwise, you did it, Now, how involved was he is another question. He is traveling to Rocky Mountain Lab every year, once a year. And he spends at least a few days out there. And then how involved is his other guy named Heinz Feldman? I'm not quite sure. But this is Vincent Munster's baby, and he does work more or less for Tony Fauci, who was offered early tenure by Tony Fauci in 2016. So Fauci in D.C. is working hand in hand, more or less, with what they're doing in Rocky Mountain Lab. So he is heavily involved in this. Whether he okayed the vaccine bat trial in Wuhan, I can't imagine the pathogen not being shipped overseas for trial without his aware of it. I think he's a little more aware than most of us can realize. In 2020, early in 2020, like even before the pandemic got going, Tony Fauci himself is editing vaccine literature. Tony Fauci is heavily involved in this kind of stuff. I mean, he is deeply into the weeds. All these pathogens, Marburg, Ebola, SARS, MERS, rabies is the big one in America. They all come from bats. And so they're all obsessed with bats at the time. So this idea was to vaccinate the bats, where these nasty things come from. And, Ken Alabek, would probably be part of this when he was playing with Marburg and with that crazy story about it. You remember the Ken Alabek story about the guy injecting himself with Marburg? Well, that's probably what happened in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Daniel Anderson is trying to infect that little bat, which is about the size of your fist. Now, they had to go to Wuhan, by the way, to test this thing because it's a Chinese horseshoe bat. The source of SARS-1 is about the size of your fist. It's this tiny little fragile bat. And you had to go to Wuhan to test it because it's the only place that has them. Wuhan is the live bat capital of the world. It can take these bats from captivity. It can put them in a biodefense lab like Wuhan Institute of Virology, BSL-4, and they can use them for experiments. And in the process of having these live bats, which they've admitted to, Peter Daszak sent out a tweet of all things, admitting to the live bats inside Daniel Anderson's BSL-4, inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology. She probably got stuck with a needle. Bless her heart, not her fault. She adamant she wasn't sick, which I completely believe her. She's a healthy 40-year-old runner. And if you're a healthy 40-year-old runner, you really don't catch COVID. You may not even know you have it, because it was designed to evade the immune system. That was the key that led Major Murphy to tell us it's an animal vaccine, immune evasion, asymptomatic spread. The way you would just spread it without even knowing you had it? That was a design feature. As disgusting and weird as that sounds, Ralph Barrett can design a genome to evade your immune system, to basically not make you sick. And that's a feature. Whenever you design a vaccine, you design it to evade the immune system, but to still inoculate it, because you kind of got to work your way around it. So that was the key that Major Murphy used in his letter to the Department of Defense, the Inspector General, saying it's an animal vaccine because of immune evasion. And that's also a feature of self-spreading vaccines. So you keep spreading it. You go to work and you spread it. You don't even realize you're sick. Just like the animal, you don't want it to be sick. You want it to be spreading it. So this was another clue, the asymptomatic spread of SARS-CoV-2, that led some people down the bioweapon path. And I don't blame them, because I was there too, before Murphy leaked his letter to the Department of Defense, or someone else did actually. It was published by Project Veritas. And at the time, no one took him seriously except for me. He will not talk to me because he's already done his talking, I think. But Murphy's letter ends to the Department of Defense as, it doesn't infect bats. And I go, it does. It infects Egyptian fruit bats. And those aren't found in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Those are found in Tony Fauci's biodefense lab in Montana. So they were using these Egyptian fruit bats in Tony Fauci's lab as surrogates. So if you want to design an animal vaccine, you can't just ship it over to Wuhan for testing. You got to develop it in a bat. So they don't have the Chinese horseshoe bat in Montana. They have something called an Egyptian fruit bat. The source of Marburg is the Egyptian fruit bat, and the potential source of like Ebola and all these other nasty pathogens. But these Egyptian fruit bats are kept in Fauci's lab. Why? They're easy to feed and breed. They eat fruit. They're fruit bats. You just toss a piece of watermelon in there and the thing nibbles on it. And you can basically these bats are born into captivity, essentially, in Fauci's biodefense lab in Montana. And in there, essentially, this thing was used to develop it. So once Murphy said it doesn't affect bats, that was the one thing I added to his long letter. It does infect bats. It infects Fauci's bats. So the SARS-2 reservoir host is not found in Wuhan. It's not found in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. COVID doesn't infect humanized mice. It's not found in the Wuhan wet market. COVID doesn't infect raccoon dogs. By infect, I mean there's no transmission. But the SARS-2 reservoir host is found in Tony Fauci's biodefense lab in Montana, and it's the Egyptian fruit bat.
It's
Oh.
I think from EcoHealth Alliance, Dr. Andrew Huff, I've had him on a ton. You know, I've had on, I mean, I've had on McCullough with Albeck, McCullough Malone, Malone Hatfill Albeck. There's no denying they're all pretty dead set on just how fucked it is. But I think the best to say was Dr. Albeck. He just said it, and then I was expecting him to give me this long genetic explanation, and he was just like, I think he just said, he's like, yeah, it came from a coronavirus lab. I think he mentioned the furin cleavage site. He was like, that doesn't exist in nature, or that doesn't naturally happen in these. And then like that was the end. He was like, so it's engineered. It was just
Yeah,
very
but
matter of fact.
we
Like,
all know about that infamous fear and cleavage site. It doesn't. I wish I could show it on camera. It doesn't show up well. But if you do it on the alignment, you can see the gap right in the middle of it, and that's what that fear and cleavage site is. But it was inserted to infect bats. It's a nasty little element. It's heavily engineered. But Ralph Barrett more or less referenced it in 2019, and he more or less pre-confessed to the crime of creating COVID-19 in 2018. Then he again lied to the U.S. biodefense officials in the Red Dawn emails. He lied to congressional staff. Ralph Barrett, being the coronavirus expert, was flown to D.C., or he flew himself up there, or drove up there, I think. I don't think he likes to fly. And he gave a presentation to congressional staff in February of 2020. And it's an hour-long technical presentation by Ralph Barrett, the coronavirus expert, on these kind of things like SARS-1 and SARS-2. And he gets to the slide halfway through this hour-long technical presentation, and he compares SARS-1 to SARS-2. And this is the point in this hour-long technical presentation where Ralph Barrett should declare the fear and cleavage site, saying this thing has pandemic potential. There is now a difference between SARS-1 and SARS-2, and it's this fear and cleavage site. It basically see it as the magic sauce of the virus is a term a virologists use. I love that. This fear and cleavage site is the magic. It's the only reason we talk about it. Again, it's inserted with purpose to infect animals, not humans. But Ralph Barrett should have mentioned the fear and cleavage site in his presentation to congressional staff in February 2020. He goes right past it. He doesn't mention it. An hour-long presentation talking about the receptor binding domain and previous outbreaks, and even down to the nucleotide level and previous samples like RATG13. Does not mention the fear and cleavage site in his hour-long presentation. And Rand Paul's Senate office published his CIA presentation recently, and Ralph Barrett even lied to the CIA. He does not include the fear and cleavage site in his presentation to the CIA. That if he said it verbally, I doubt it if it's not in his presentation, because I've listened to every word he's ever said pre and post pandemic. This guy, if it's not on his slides, he does not mention it. He sticks to the talking points. So in his CIA presentation that was recently unearthed by Senator Rand Paul's office, Ralph Barrett has lied to the CIA. So that's why I can say this thing was a cover up, but just by about 5 people. It wasn't some grand conspiracy. And my point to the World Health Organization was this: someone like Marion Koopmans. She's another, virologist that was over there with Peter Daszak in the whole, woohoo, getting to the origin of the thing. She didn't even know about this thing. So she didn't even know what it was. So the cover was very small because it's such advanced technology. A bat vaccine? What? Really, guys? But that's where the money was. $14 million potentially. A contagious bat vaccine? Well, that's where Fauci's money was, a transmissible animal vaccine. And so it was just hard for us to get our brain around that thing. But once you understand it as being, it was almost designed to spread. And that was a feature, not a bug, in animals, not humans. So it was really hard to tell. But if you put 2 and 2 together, Ralph Barrett's genome and Vincent Munster's aerosolization agents, there's you can read about this in Brownstone. You can read about this by Substack. You can read about this all kinds of places now. It's kind of slowly getting out there in the open. So I am having a difficult time getting U.S. media to cover it. It's I don't know if I ever will. I'll probably just croak from this earth before they even touch it. They throw it back at me? Defamation. We can't run this, what are you talking about defamation? It's an accident, and I've been on camera for now several years doing this. This is kind of getting old for me. I'm kind of getting bored by it because I'm not getting pushback from anyone. So, I'm in Fauci's inbox. I'm in Barrett's inbox. I'm in Munster's inbox. I'm like, I'm going to keep talking publicly and not so privately about this until you defend yourselves. So let's not defend men that will not defend themselves.
Well, if they are guilty, then they're not going to defend themselves. I think the lack of answer is kind of the answer.
Oh, it's bad. U.S. Right to Know is one of these food organization groups that somehow got involved in the whole FOIA, Freedom of Information Request Act. They've gotten into a 6-year-long lawsuit with the University of North Carolina. Ralph Barrett will not give up his 2019 emails. It's
Yeah, it's no, yeah, take it from me. You've been doing this for years, so you know. Yeah, no, hell will freeze over.
hell will freeze over. They'll go down not saying anything. I
I
mean, you
was
just lie,
allowed
lie,
back
lie, and
on.
deny.
Yeah, I was allowed back on YouTube last November after August 2021 till November 2025. That was banned for all this shit. iTunes, Twitter, all of it. They all let me
What
back.
was it you said? Was it about the vaccine?
Just everything.
Everything.
From the beginning, it was like we can now, in hindsight, we can see it all unfolding. But just from the beginning, like, what is this thing? To like, where is it from? To
Yeah.
you literally like, what? How is it's like tied into like George Floyd riots and voting, and then what is this vaccine? Is this safe? What is Iver? It was all genuinely me just naively going into it and be like, what is all this shit? And they didn't like it. They didn't. Not only did they not like the vaccine comments, they gave me strikes for like telling people to take vitamin D. It was like it was crazy all out. They went scorched earth. No matter what, no appeal was ever. It was just fuck off. And if I couldn't even tell you what did they not like? They didn't like that my mouth was moving and doctors were on the camera. Like that's what they didn't like.
Oh, yeah. When I first saw you, it was you interviewing Dr. Malone 4 years ago. I forgot about that. Looking back at your impressive channel, I distinctly remember that because Malone had gone on to like Brett Weinstein's podcast and announced that, hey, I invented the mRNA thing, but I'm not taking it. And everyone, like me, was like, oh, interesting. What else is he going to say? That's when I found you. You were one of the first ones, I think, to
Yeah.
interview him after that.
Yeah, he said
Weinstein
that on
interview.
my show. So I've done yesterday was episode 2000. He was episode 495. So he was very early. I have a crazy memory. That was July 1st, 2021.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
He
I
came on
watched
there.
that. I distinctly remember you watching him interview. I remember that American flag over your shoulder, and I
Yeah, yeah.
remember you were
And
the
he
first.
was, I mean, that's the thing. It was all very, compared to where we are now, it's all very milk toast. It was like, I think he even said, he's like, if you're an older person, you might want to get it, but, younger don't. It was very like, all right, that's very fair. And then as it goes on, it's, Ed Dowd and, I've legitimately had on every single person in this movement. And we now know, we look at it and it's, crimes against humanity. But yeah, they did to me, but that alone, that right there is the answer. The fact that there was so much hubbub around it and the fact that they sealed shut every avenue of information that didn't come directly from the hallowed halls of the CDC, to me, that is the answer. That there's
I
fucking
got the CDC to talk to me. Sitting in this chair in Houston, I knew they had unpublished data. And I basically said, look, I want it. And what it was the Egyptian fruit bats. The CDC in Atlanta, Georgia is a top secret, not top secret, we all know it's public record, BSL-4, that
Mhm.
you and I can't get into. You have to have an FBI health check, background check, all that kind of other stuff. I just emailed the guy a couple of times and I said, look, give it to me. I want your unpublished data on Egyptian fruit bats. And he goes, yes, you are correct. My Egyptian fruit bat colony is a non-natural reservoir host for SARS-CoV-2. There's only one other Egyptian fruit bat colony on the planet. It's in Fauci's Biodefense Lab in Montana. So I got the US CDC to give me what I needed. And inside that boost of confidence, I finally found a smoking gun email written by a Colorado scientist to Vincent Munster early in the pandemic saying, this Egyptian fruit bat colony I raised for you is also a reservoir host for SARS-2. He called it, what was the term he used? Peculiar data, basically. And Vincent Munster, didn't want him to run the test, but he eventually did, and it got caught up in an email. And I put that email in front of every virologist. So, if you go down to the microscopic level, there's not a cover up, but yes, don't get me wrong. At the big level, there is. At the bureaucracy level, the CDC, take the vaccine or else. Fauci, take it or else. I think there was some sort of like God complex mixed in with a guilty thing. I mean, if you blew up the world, you would feel a little guilty, wouldn't you?
Sure.
And you may force this vaccine you think works upon you. I know better than you. This thing can hurt you. It's an animal vaccine, so let me protect you. So I'm not trying to defend Fauci by any means. There's probably no one that disliked him more than me during the pandemic with that whole mask mandate stuff and all that. So I just think it's fun to be able to serve this thing right back up to his desk and in his inbox. Because I'll send him this interview if you're willing to run it. And I'll put it right in front of him and I'll say, look, I'm talking about you openly now. You have to come out of, retirement. You have to defend yourself, or some nobody like me sitting on a pile of evidence is going to just prosecute you in the court of public opinion. And I have science. I have peer-reviewed in vivo transmission data. I have unpublished data. I have the CDC. I have the German lab. I have this own, Colorado email to your own Rocky Mountain lab. the SARS-2 reservoir host is inside your biodefen 7 Montana, and you did this to us, and I'm going to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Unless you want to hide for the rest of your mortal life, I mean, have fun. But this is going to destroy your legacy, Dr. Fauci. And I'm going to send it to your inbox, into your Gmail, politely, pleasantly, professionally. And I'm going to say, look, Tommy had me on, and him and I want to talk. And if you want to come online, that would be great. If you want to defend yourself, Dr. Fauci. But I'll end it like this. Sago taunted me. I said, that's all you got? The World Health Organization scientists, the 27 of them? One of them taunted me and said, go take it up with those you're accusing. And I was like, okay.
All right, fair enough.
And you know what they did? They published their response in Nature to make this private debate spill into public. I think they played me. Oh, well, here we go. We got this little chump that's going to go forward, and we'll see how far he makes it before he runs into some sort of brick wall. But I've got, we don't have anything to fear, Tommy, as long as you have the truth. As long as you're searching for the truth, and as long as you have the truth, who cares? What can they do to you if you have the truth? I mean,
well, they'll kill you, but
all right. Well, that's even, I'm not going to martyr myself or anything, but I'm not going to be unprofessional about it either. We're not defaming anyone or anything.
Yeah.
It was an accident.
I know. I've reached out to the CDC tons of times, and I've never been like, I'm gonna grill you. I've always just been like, please come on and tell me your side. That's always been my way of going about this. Is like, I just want to hear people's side, even if they're lying. Like, I want to hear their side and then just document that. And never got a response. Didn't even get a no. Just didn't get a response. And
have you tried Robert Redfield?
yeah, former CDC director. I've tried them all.
He hasn't talked to you?
No, I've tried.
So, get him on too. I'd like to talk to him too. I've tried.
I can't get a response from him.
Have you tried his Gmail?
I've tried everything. There are certain people that you just can't get a response from. In my experience.
Well, I'm like you. I can't get a response from him. He kind of annoys me because he's so close. But he's willing to talk about Ralph Barrick's role openly, saying he is the mastermind behind this thing. But he's like me, exactly where I was before Murphy showed up. He thinks it's some sort of PLA self-spreading vaccine for humans. And I go, no, Robert Redfield, it's a self-spreading vaccine for bats circulating in humans. He's a virologist who worked at the CDC. And I told him point blank, I got the evidence from your own CDC bat lab that this thing was a bat vaccine designed to spread in bats, but accidentally spilled over into humans in the trial in the one Institute of Virology. He's so close, it's annoying. He knows it's a self-spreading vaccine. He thinks it, like me at one point, it was designed for PLA military kind of grade technology. I go, no, this is Fauci's technology, essentially circulating humans for animals. It wasn't designed for us humans. There's a very similar receptor binding domain between bats and humans. There's also the ACE2 receptor, basically, is a pretty much a match. So if they design, Ralph Barrick and Vincent Munster designed something for a bat, it could accidentally spill into us. And it transmits efficiently. That's why people were kind of thrown off by how quick this thing got going, as if it was pre-adapted for humans. No, it was pre-adapted for mammals, of which we are one of them. So that was the accidental part of this. I don't know if they had a kill switch in it. The more I think about it, I write the book, they do. The more I think about it, they don't. I use the kill switch to lower the kind of people's brains on the whole craziness of this whole thing. I think they were so idiotic they didn't even have a kill switch thought out. Something that would kill it if it spilled over into humans. So they can do stuff like that, where they can engineer these genomes to do stuff like that. I don't really think they thought that far ahead. When you get down to it, these guys are they're ambitious, is what they are. They want the next publication in Nature and Science, and that's all they care about. And they do this with novel publications of novel genomes and novel vaccines and whatnot. So
a lot of hubris, a lot of ego.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll kind of wrap it up with, I think, a great example you might actually find you might enjoy is, so at the same time we were doing the Manhattan Project. Oh, hold on. Somebody just tried to enter the meeting. You're an hour early, sir. Hold on.
The Manhattan Project was referenced by Major Murphy in his letter to the DoD Inspector General. He called it a Manhattan Project for vaccinating bats.
Just during the Manhattan Project, at the same time, we were doing something where we tied all these little sacks of like napalm to timed fuses on them to bats, and we were gonna drop like 250,000 or 1,000,000 of them out of bombers over Tokyo, because Tokyo is primarily wood, and the bats would go nest in the attics, and they would wait until nighttime, and the timer was for like 4 or 5 hours. So, they were going to drop them at like 2 p.m. These bats were going to go flood the city and then burn it down in a way more effective than even firebombing did.
The bat bomb. Yes.
So they tested it out in the desert, and it worked. but it didn't go after the mock-up town they made. It went back to the Air Force Base and burned down all the hangars. So the weapon worked, but it accidentally didn't. And then the Manhattan Project worked, so they're like, all right, fuck that thing.
The bat
That's
bomb.
kind of what you're getting at, is like it worked, but it was an accident, but it worked.
Great analogy.
Yeah.
Great
Well, it's not
analogy.
an
It's
analogy,
so good.
it's a real example.
It's so good. Your analogy is so good. Guess the type of bat they use. It's called a Mexican free-tail bat. So are you up there in the Northeast?
Yeah.
I'm down here in Texas. They're all over the place. This Mexican free-tailed bat obviously flies across the border, like you know what, and basically nest and roost everywhere. And guess what COVID infects? Mexican free-tailed bats. Guess what Ralph Barrett chose as a surrogate for his bat vaccine? Mexican free-tailed bats. That's what makes, it's not the transmission model. Ralph Barrett's technology doesn't transmit, but he was using Mexican free-tailed bats as an infection model. So that story of yours ties in perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah. We got to wrap it. I have another show I have to get to. I will send this to you on Twitter when it's up. It'll be up a little bit later today. Send me the link to your book and all that in the Substack and everything, so I can copy and paste it and put it in the description. Dude, appreciate your time, and I'd love to have you on again sometime.
Thanks for having me, Tommy. Take
All
care.
right, Jim. Thank you so much, man. Thank you for your
You got it.
time, guys. Thank